Great. Okay. Well, welcome, folks. If you're just joining, please introduce yourself in the chat. And uh, happy to have you all here to nerd out about Cleveland's budget. Um, Disclaimer on the front end, I am not a finance expert. I am not a budget expert. I'm going to keep things pretty base level here. If there's people in the room with more knowledge that want to chime in and add context that I'm missing here, please feel free to. And yeah, we'll keep things high level. I'm going to talk about the general process the budget takes, opportunities for advocacy, some lessons I learned this past year, and things that I'm looking at for 2026, 2027. And then we're going to talk about the actual budget, what it includes. So with that, big thing to start with is that there are two different budgets in the city of Cleveland. One is the operating budget, one is the capital budget. Capital budget includes major infrastructure projects, streets, rec centers, parks. The operating budget is everything else. Um, Personnel being the major thing, but supplies, utilities, travel, anything that's not major infrastructure is going to be in that operating budget. They both follow different timelines. I'm going to talk about both of them, but we're going to start with the operating budget. So, this process starts usually around September through November when department heads are asked to submit their budget requests to the mayor's office. Um, frequently it's pretty similar to the previous years, but there's certainly some changes depending on if your department is doing new things or growing, or shrinking. The mayor puts together the mayor's estimate. This is like a 100+ page document that goes, department by department, line item by line item, breakdown of the budget for each of those departments. I recommend that if this is interesting to you, definitely check out that mayor's estimate document. There's also just some helpful information in there about like uh, the organizational chart and the different funds that go into the operating budget, where the city's revenue comes from and how that all gets broken down. Interesting stuff. Then we've got uh, city council hosting budget hearings. After that, mayor's estimate comes out. These last about a week, week and a half, and they're full day long hearings, where departments come up one by one and justify their spending, talk about any changes to their budget. It's frankly a time where city council members kind of get to express concerns, frustrations, celebrate, wins, and you can learn a lot by watching these hearings, to learn about what council members care about, what they're passionate about, what is concerning them most, things like that. So, city council makes some adjustments to the mayor's estimate and amends it. I'm going to talk more about that. Usually it's not significant, the things that are changing, but there are changes. They go through a reconciliation process, and then it's read 2 more times in front of city council before it's approved. It has to sit for, like, the charter lays out this kind of weird timeline where it has to sit for 7 days after the second reading, and I've been told in the past that like this is a public comment period, but at that point the budget is like very much set. So uh, most public comment is going to be more useful earlier in the process. So the opportunities for advocacy in the city's operating budget is really during these, first couple steps. Getting in ahead of those departmental budget requests can be hugely helpful. If you can get meetings with department heads asking for specific things, and making sure they get included in those requests, is probably the best way to see any changes happen. Also, targeting the mayor's office to ensure that changes are, reflected in that mayor's estimate. Advocacy can target city council members ahead of those budget hearings and during those budget hearings as well. But, big lesson I learned this year is definitely earlier the better. So, ahead of those department requests, I had some advocates submit letters to department heads asking for some changes, and some additional funding for safe streets, especially around staffing. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but um, we didn't go super aggressively, and I was planning on doing more targeted advocacy towards council members once they saw the first draft of the budget, hoping that they might advocate for some changes on their side. Shout out to Collinwood Better Streets, who hosted a postcard party and sent Councilman Plenzik, dozens of postcards and other Better Street committees sent in postcards to their members asking for, more funding for safe streets. I also wrote a memo and sent it to council members that I have a relationship with outlining some of the things that we want, but ultimately, um, this year especially, making sure that we get ahead of it and get those requests in to department heads and to the mayor's office ahead of this budget process is going to be important. So, like I said, not a ton of significant changes are going to happen during those budget hearings, but they are a great opportunity to get a sense of what council's priorities and concerns are. I'm going to share a clip. If someone can, Laura, I can see your face. So if you can hear this, give me a thumbs up to make sure that everyone can hear.
Okay. Oh. No.
Okay. Let me, sorry, share computer sound. Yes. Here we go. This should work now.
Yes.
You explain, along yourself and the director of finance, the transfer to capital projects. Can you touch on that, what that is?
Yes, to the councilman through the chair, it has been an annual allocation for the last handful of years for our Vision Zero initiative, which is a $200,000 line item in City Planning's general fund budget to improve traffic safety. Because sometimes that goes toward capital at the end of the year, any remaining balance transfers into a capital account. But we have used that for supplemental planning, such as the East 55th Safety Action Plan. We use that to help support the planning of the Cleveland Moves Multimodal Transportation Plan. This has helped to support also, as we're looking forward into 2026, looking at quick build installations and local match for some of the grants that I mentioned.
Okay, so within that 200, is that those goofy things you put in the street that are about 2 feet tall at the intersection?
I believe you're talking about delineators.
The delineators. I love those delineators because I ran over one on Prospect Avenue, okay? I love those delineators where you couldn't plow the snow around them, where the ice, there was a glacier near each one of them. So my question is this: how can you put up the delineators without getting the approval of the council people?
To the councilman through the chair, these are what are called quick build safety improvements. I know you have some as well at East 156th and Waterloo to help slow the left-hand turns at that intersection. They are low-cost, quick installation safety improvements that we coordinate through Public Works to install. Happy to continue conversations with council members about our overall mobility and safety improvements.
But why don't you get a sign off from the council people on these? You just put them up without any concurrence with the council people. Is there a reason for that?
To the councilman through the chair, the locations that we install these are based on crash data and multimodal priorities that are established in our plans. There has been a lot of talk at the table here today, and I think all of us chafe against the speed of being able to do things. This is our ability to make the change that we are hearing requested from residents quickly.
Okay. I think we're going to have to look at within the body as to legislate, if possible, because again, all of a sudden these things appear without any engagement of the council people. And then again, who gets the complaints when the snow can't get plowed, or you can't cross the intersection because they can't plow the intersection properly, like I got this winter. So I think again, if I have to put in the legislation, I'm going to do it, because you just can't. And I see the mayor's chief here. You just can't do stuff without the concurrence of the council in the wards. I got elected to serve. I didn't get elected to be the pincushion after you guys take action and just stick these things up all over the place.
Okay, so um I don't mean to single Councilman Palencic out. There are many instances of, these kinds of conversations where council members are, you know, mostly these budget hearings are time for council members to bring up concerns, bring up things that they're not happy with, that departments are doing. Um, I flagged this one in particular because, I personally think that any legislation that would require council approval for every single delineator, in the ward would definitely be detrimental to, speed of progress. And yeah, I just wanted to show it as an example of what these hearings look like, what these conversations look like. Um, yeah. So one challenge with the work that we do is that these priorities land across several different departments in the city. So primarily, these departments are Public Works, City Planning, and the Mayor's Office of Capital Projects, commonly referred to as MOCAP. And we certainly work with other departments, Sustainability, Public Health, Urban AI, Parks and Rec. But in terms of the funding, these are primarily the departments that this funding falls in. So now things that came out of the 2026 budget. So here's a breakdown of the general fund. I think it's just a useful visualization of where the general fund goes. The general fund is just one fund within the total operating budget. Like the airport is separate, water is separate. There's some other separate ones, but this funds most of the departments in the city in terms of staff and materials and things like that. And so, notably, public safety gets almost half of the city's general fund budget. And I think it's just kind of a useful visual of, how departments are funded and in comparison to each other. So one of Bike Cleveland's main priorities and hopes for what would come out of this budget was just more staff. Particularly in engineering and within the crews that install those safety enhancements, those delineators, in particular, but also speed tables, upgrading bike lanes, crosswalks, things like that. And engineering, I'm going to talk a little bit about how City of Cleveland's staffing compares to others. So I'm pulling out two examples here. First from Detroit, and in Detroit they have a transportation division. So unlike the city of Cleveland, where all of our transportation stuff is split up between the departments, Detroit has this consolidated division, and among that they have around 22 engineering staff specifically in this transportation department. These engineers kind of fall on different levels. There's kind of different levels of engineer if you have a professional engineering degree or certification. They also have these engineering support specialists, which I assume maybe don't have a PE, but support traffic engineering work. So they have 22 employees, and then Pittsburgh, which has a Department of Mobility Infrastructure, have 14 staff members. Specifically for engineering, their whole department is massive. They have they have a safe routes to school person, which Cleveland doesn't. They have a transportation demand management staff person dedicated. They have like a curbside manager, lots of things that Cleveland doesn't have. But most notably, and most what we were focused on was this engineering lack of capacity in the city. So the city has budgeted one engineer in traffic engineering, and it's been that way for a long time. This means that a lot of our work ends up being contracted out to consultants. And yeah, so stark difference. And I want to highlight next two clips from budget hearings where some council members that I connected with to ask for help in advocating for more staff, kind of what those conversations look like, because I think it gives some insight on like what really happens in these budget hearings and like what doesn't. So
is there any questions on traffic engineering? I'm gonna go to Brian Casey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, to the Commissioner, how many actual traffic engineers do we have in the city?
To
To the chair of the councilman, we don't have an actual consulting engineer just yet. Dave Bass, who's just joined our team, will be getting his professional degree probably by the end of this quarter.
All right, so the city of Cleveland does not have any traffic engineers.
Professional engineers. I graduated from engineering school.
No, I know you, but I'm saying
No, we do not.
we do not. Okay, thank you. Why not?
The gentleman that we had actually moved to ODOT, so he was the only consulting engineer we had on staff for the last 20 years.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilman Casey. Councilman,
Um, that was one instance, and shortly after that, here was another. Although I
I don't
think
know if
I'm
he
actually
has-
in the
I don't
wrong
think he
spot
has
of this
a cell
video.
phone.
Let me.
Understand that?
Tables are a part of that.
Sorry,
But as
guys.
You and I and our team visible, whether it's snow or the paint.
Akron, they
Into that 185 one.
speed bubble will be right.
Sorry,
Real
guys.
bikes.
One sec.
Those are stay out in the sun.
But I've seen some of the other stuff there, and you did a good job of dancing around that one.
Okay, we're going to
To
Councilman
Councilman, I
Austin
think we need
Davis.
to take it would be this.
Okay, here.
Thank you, Chair, to the Commissioner. Thank you for joining us. Commissioner, thank you for spending many hours with me to talk about the many needs and desires of my community for traffic calming measures. We're on the same page. There's so much great stuff to work on. I'll just echo a couple of my colleagues' comments, picking up on where Councilman Casey left off. I'm sorry to hear that the engineer you had went to greener pastures. My understanding, and I'm getting some of the same feedback I think Councilman Casey has been getting, is that most traffic engineering departments in Ohio have a lot of engineers, associate engineers, mid-level engineers, higher engineers. Sounds like we don't have any. Do we need more? Do we need some?
Through the chair to the councilman, I think that we need to take a step back about what is a traffic engineer and what all the other cities have. A lot of other cities, if you look at them, aren't structured similarly. So they're more like what you would see in MoCap, where that's a whole transportation group, and those would be classified as traffic engineers. So I just trying to compare city to city is really difficult. Sometimes a traffic engineer is actually a technician. So we have 4 signal technicians in our shop. Other cities call those traffic engineers. So trying to compare city to city is really difficult to do.
Through the chair, actually, that's incredibly helpful. So in other cities, their traffic engineering work maybe. Well, let me rephrase that. In our city, our traffic engineering work has a bit of a home in MoCap, a big home in U, probably home in streets as well. But in other cities, that may be more streamlined.
Yeah, through the chair of the councilman, correct. So we review a lot of the MoCap projects, actually all of them, to make sure they're in compliance. So we do review those. But other cities call different engineers different things. It could be a TE1, but that might just be a civil engineer. So it's really difficult to really cross-pollinate what we do versus what another city would do.
Through the chair, understood. And so, but then in your estimation, we're not lacking for technical expertise in City Hall.
Through the chair of the councilman, no.
Okay, that's great to hear. I'll flag, just speaking of other cities, Columbus. Cincinnati's budget's a little bit bigger than ours for traffic engineering. It looks like it's relatively similar. Columbus is something like 4 or 5 times our size. And so I'll just say those are cities that are growing. To make the point, these are cities that have been growing for longer than our city. We've experienced some trickle population growth for the last 2 years, but I'm dreaming bigger. And I think your work to make our neighborhoods safer, more human scale, more human centric is an essential part of why people move to these cities. So as you get prepared to amp up, let us know, because I really want to keep investing in those efforts.
Okay, so I pulled out these 2 clips because I think they do well in illustrating like not a lot of changes are happening necessarily at the table. I'm happy to see that these issues were raised, but I also think I'm getting the sense that when department heads and division heads come to the table, like they're not really in a position where they can advocate for more staff at that time. That is really done earlier in the process, when they submit their budget requests. And I think you would be hard pressed to hear someone who heads a department or division to admit at the table, yes, we're understaffed, yes, we're under capacity. And so I think that was one of my big takeaways from this last budget season is I can't really expect those heads to maybe admit that there is a lack of capacity, and that advocates should definitely engage departments much earlier in the process to get those requests in before the mayor's even creating his estimate and his draft. Um, Great. So I wanted to highlight another important opportunity for advocacy, and that's council discretionary funds. Um, there are three major sources of this. One is the Neighborhood Equity Fund, which this actually came out of council reconciliation this past year, where every ward will get $300,000 to use at their discretion. This is actually down from 2025 and 2024, when council really pushed and advocated for them to have $600,000 each year, each ward for discretionary purposes. Lots of council members actually still have leftover funds from this and haven't spent all of it down. And so some council members will just have the 300,000, others will have 300,000 plus whatever was left over from previous years. Casino revenue funds are another important source. They get 15% of what the city brings in from casino taxes, and that comes out to about $125,000 per ward. And then there's CDBG grants, which also give a near $500,000 per ward. This is the main source of funding for community development corporations and things like home repair programs. Um, so often these funds are allocated directly to the CDC or to other programs. And these funds are really great opportunities for smaller projects in your wards that might not have been funded, in the main operating budget or in the capital budget. Council also advocated for and got themselves an additional staff person for every single ward is getting an additional assistant. And a success example, and we have some people here from the Detroit Shoreway, Cadell, Better Streets Committee. You know, after a woman was tragically hit and killed at the intersection of West 58th and Lorraine, there were calls for safety improvements. The councilman, who you heard earlier, was very willing to fund this. And so this is an installation that's going to be put in this summer for safety improvements that I think will dramatically improve this intersection. And it's an example of what residents can win through discretionary funds if they advocate for it. I also want to note, a similar installation was put in at East 156th and Waterloo in 2022. Central line hardening, which you see here, and some small curb extensions, and there was not a single crash in that intersection in 2025. And despite there being three pedestrians hit in that intersection in 2021 and in 2022 before the installations were put in, no one has been hit at that intersection since then. So I think, as a case study for what these delineators can do, can actually genuinely save lives, save people from, life-altering injuries, relatively low cost, high impact. So much of what we do comes through the capital budget. So actual infrastructure projects, they come through the capital budget. And despite not winning increased staffing in the operating budget, there are many soon-to-be wins for Better Streets in the capital budget. I'm going to highlight a handful here. So this is just for 2026, and I will note, the capital budget has not been approved in full yet. So this is all still going to be going through hearings, but running down the list. Cleveland Moves implementation. So Cleveland Moves was the city's mobility bike plan that they passed in 2025, sorry, a year ago. They passed it a year ago. And they're now going to get 1.5 million for implementation. This is going to help design streets to get some safety improvements and potentially bike lanes, including places like Berea Road, Denison, East 55th, uh, and some others. And this will help with the design. East 66th Street, which will include a low stress bikeway, Memorial Bridges Loop, another low stress bikeway in the downtown area, Shaker Boulevard, which doesn't have a design yet, but I anticipate to have bike lanes hopefully, and certainly safety improvements. Superior Midway, 2.4 million. Wade Park Avenue, which will certainly be getting roundabouts similar to Franklin Boulevard, but also potentially bike infrastructure. St. Clair Avenue, which is getting lots of safety improvements, sidewalk leveling program, and wanted to highlight too the residential street resurfacing funding, with a little asterisk. So, notably, the largest item that I'm listing here, and this is, for residential streets. I think pavement condition also often rises to the top for council members and for residents who are not necessarily super tapped into safe streets and active transportation. And so originally this was going to receive $12 million, but through council advocacy was bumped up to 8 million, or it's bumped up 8 million to be a 20 million in total. The one benefit from this that I'll note is that the city is starting to streamline more, adding speed tables on residential streets that were just resurfaced so that, crews don't have to come back out. Also to address concerns of like when a street is redone and has fresh asphalt, like that can cause and encourage speeding. So I do hope to see that with this increase in funding, that means more residential streets will get speed tables right off the bat. And then a nice thing about the capital improvement plan, the capital budget, is that it also gives you a multi-year idea of what projects will be funded. So here are some that are coming to us from 2027 and beyond. Cleveland Moves planning to receive 1.5 million every year between now and 2030. Vision Zero implementation will be funded at 500,000 starting in 2027. Right now, it does have a $200,000 budget within city planning, so that's getting increased. Lakefront bikeway improvements, the Morgana Run Trail is getting improvements. Shaker Boulevard, which I mentioned before, and I'm guessing it's a 2-year project, and so it's getting more funding. The Lorraine Midway, getting millions over the next 3 years. Lee Road, which doesn't have a design, but many of these aren't necessarily concrete, definitely getting bike lanes, but very likely will be. Lee Road and Stokes, MLK Drive, and Fulton, and then the Slavic Village downtown connector. So I do think that there's a lot of exciting, it's exciting to see some of these projects, get funded in the capital budget. And like I said, capital budget is still underway. I would anticipate that there will be questions about safety improvements, potential addition of bike lanes on some of these roads, funding for some of these bigger ticket items like the Lorraine Midway. So anytime that council members can hear positive comments from constituents is huge. They don't have published yet when the capital budget will be heard again in committee, likely in the Development Planning and Sustainability Committee in the coming weeks. But would be happy to send out an action alert to this list once that's happening, because public comment, emails to council members saying that you support the funding of these projects is super helpful. Okay, plugging the next training. I can come back to that, but I want to give some time for reflections, thoughts, questions. Even if you don't have a question, I'm just kind of curious as to any thoughts folks have on this.
Jenna, there was a